Hello again, I'm
I'm
Morgan,
Benji.
and we are students at Duke University. This is going to be the second video. In the first video, we talked about how we went from no data to getting data, which was great. And now we're going to talk about our process of getting our raw data into a clean and beautiful table for analysis.
Yeah, so when we scrape data, like we talked about in the last video, we just get the data. However, the tabulizer package that we use to scrape the data gives it to us. This is not necessarily in a format that is highly functionable with R code or Python code that we actually that we're actually using to analyze the data and to look through it. One of the big things that we noticed right away is that tabulizer would tack on to the end of any area that it was reading, any like text that it read in a specific area, /r/r//n. That string of characters would just be on the end of every other string, which is an issue because we don't want to, or it's not like a huge issue, but it's annoying, and we don't want to have to look at to type in /r/r/n whenever we search for anything in our data table. So one of the first steps was to clean the data to remove that. To do that, we basically ran a for loop that I'll show in a minute. But the first thing we noticed is that there were a couple columns where it wasn't showing /r/r/n at the end of them. These were integer columns, so they were numerical things. So this first part of the script that you can see on your screen moves those columns that wasn't showing that to the end of the data frame, which also, if you look through our data frame, is why there are some columns that don't make a ton of sense being at the end of our data frame. Like, for instance, type 4 chart. One of the charge categories, charge number 4 type, is at the end of our data frame for no apparent reason, even though the rest information about charge 4 is earlier in the data frame. And that's just because of because we had to move it to the end so that we could run the for loop that you can see here. This for loop basically iterates through every column, and then nested inside is a for loop that iterates through every row within a column and removes the string, replaces, the key phrase here is the highlighted section, is what I just highlighted, replace /r/r/n with an empty string, so that is no longer in any of the strings in our data frame. So if you were looking for somebody's name, say my name was in one of the was in the data frame, instead of being the string being Benjamin Gold /r/r/n, it would just be Benjamin Gold, and you could very easily search for me and see if I committed a crime. So that was the first thing that we had to clean. But there were still some issues that we'll talk about in a second.
Right, so after saving these to new CSV files, we ran our second cleaning script. And this was just basically going through and making sure that everything was like nice and pretty and organized. So just a few small things. We renamed one of the columns that was spelled incorrectly. We also were very concerned with race. That was like probably the main category of our analysis. And so we wanted to make sure that we were able to use all of the data possible. And I think there were about 10 rows that were missing a value for race. So the officer just didn't input it into the PDF. And considering how many PDFs we had, we felt comfortable dropping those that were missing.
Also, many of the PDFs that were missing race were also missing a lot of other biographical information, which is what we were, general biographical / demographic information is what we were targeting all of our analysis off of. So we felt pretty comfortable.
Exactly. And then we also we wanted a separate column for the date, the time, the year, the month, the day. So this is just separating the date time into different columns for each. And then we were able to change some typos in the PDFs from like brow is in color. So obviously they meant brown, changing those for hair color and eye color. And then one last thing that Benji is going to talk about.
So we touched on this briefly in our last video, but some of the arrest reports had second pages, which were formatted differently than the first pages. And so one of the things, so as we talked about in the last video, and if you want more context for this, please watch our last video, Tabulizer looks for specific areas on a PDF, and it does it by page. So it'll look for the same areas on every page. So, and we were linking our variables up to where on the first page it was. So the agency, like this thing, for instance, agency name is always in the same place on the first page, but that area corresponds to a totally different, like basically box on the form in the second page. So one of the things we noticed was that every second page, the agency name would equal name, which obviously isn't an actual police department agency name. So we knew that those those were new rows the tabularizer was creating when it was reading through second pages. And we basically ran through the same process in the first video to scrape the second pages and merge them in. But when we were cleaning the data, we needed to delete all of the rows where agency name equals name, because those were second pages and therefore it didn't have any of the information that we wanted, and didn't actually collect any useful information from the second pages. Like I said, we ran through a very similar process as in the first video, to scrape certain areas off second pages. And then put that into our data table and ran all these cleaning scripts on the second pages too, to make the final data table that we actually used.
Right. So the last thing that we needed to do to get our final clean data that we didn't have to wrangle or do anything else with was part of another branch of our analysis that we wanted to do, focusing on spatial data and like geographic analysis. We really wanted to look into which areas of Durham, specific arrests were happening, specific incidents, just everything like that. We wanted to do a lot of spatial mapping. And unfortunately, we were only given addresses of where the arrests occurred from the PDFs. So we needed to convert those addresses into longitude and latitude coordinates to plot the spatial data. So doing this, we used a for loop shown here, and geocoding from Google Maps that basically takes the column of place of arrest, which gives us the address, and uses the geocoding to get a longitude and latitude coordinates for that address, and then putting it into those specific columns in our data set. And then the exceptions at the bottom are printed if the address is wrong or not found, which actually happened quite a few times. So some of the addresses were found incorrectly, such as in Washington, D.C. or another random state that's obviously not Durham, North Carolina, and some of them were just not found at all. These often occurred like on the middle of a highway or something where the address wasn't able to be recorded precisely. So from there, what we had to do was fill them in manually. So we actually ended up having to go in and look at the address, copy and paste it into a geocoder like online to get the longitude and latitude coordinates ourselves, and then going in and changing the longitude and latitude for all of these. And as you can see, we had to do this honestly a lot of times, which was pretty tedious, but all in all, it was very helpful for us, and we ended up building a lot of spatial visualizations, which we will touch on later. And the last two scripts that I was showing you that have to do with the spatial data are actually in the folder in our GitHub called 30 Spatial Mapping, which is not the one that we were talking about for the rest of the video, but we felt that it was still part of the cleaning and manipulating the data.
Yeah, so the first two scripts we talked about, as well as most of the like CSVs and the kind of process, is in the folder called 10 clean data in our GitHub. Just to reiterate, our GitHub is called Small Town Policing Accountability Data 2022. 2022, sorry about that. You can also look for my GitHub username, Benjamin-M-Gold, which our public GitHub has all of the information has all the code as well as CSVs, and is very useful if you want to like basically see our process and reproduce it on your own, which is hopefully the intention of our video if you're interested in finding out how your police department is doing. Thank you for listening.
All right.